Before this video ends, you're going to understand something that probably nobody at that wedding understood, and you're going to understand it through 6 clues that John hid in the text. Clue number 1, the very first sentence of the story. Clue number 2, why he chose a wedding. Clue number 3, 3 words that sound almost rude. Clue number 4, the detail of the 6 stone jars that almost nobody notices. Clue number 5, one more vessel hidden 3 years later in another part of the Bible. Clue number 6, a single closing line that recontextualizes everything. Stick with me until the end, because when you discover the 6th clue, you're never going to read this passage the same way again. Let's start. Mary, the mother of Jesus, walks up to her son in the middle of a wedding, and she says 3 words, "They have no wine." That's it. If you read it fast, it sounds like a practical woman solving a domestic problem. But these are not 3 practical words. These are the 3 words that started the public ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. The 3 words that opened the first sign of the Messiah. The 3 words that, when you understand what John is doing in this chapter, shake everything you thought you knew about Jesus' first miracle. Because Jesus' first miracle was not about wine. It was never about wine. The wine was just the wrapping paper. What was inside was something much bigger. Let's go straight to the first clue. Pause on the first line of John chapter 2, verse 1. On the 3rd day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. Read it again. Slowly. On the 3rd day. Any Jew of the 1st century who heard that phrase wasn't thinking about a calendar. They were thinking about a promise. Look at what Hosea the prophet says, chapter 6, verse 2. After 2 days he will revive us. On the 3rd day he will raise us up, that we may live before him. Look at what happens with Abraham in Genesis 22, verse 4, when he goes to sacrifice Isaac. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Look at what happens with Israel in Exodus 19, verse 16, before they receive the law at Sinai. On the 3rd day in the morning, there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud upon the mount. 3rd day, 3rd day, 3rd day. In the Hebrew mind, that phrase is theological code. It's the phrase that shows up right before God is about to do something massive. It's the phrase of dawn after the crisis. It's the phrase of resurrection. And John places it deliberately as the first line of the first public sign of Jesus. Coincidence? Not with John. John doesn't write anything by accident. John is the evangelist of symbols. When he says on the 3rd day, he's planting a seed. He's telling the reader, pay attention. This is not a social chronicle. This is a revelation, and it's going to end in a resurrection. What the average reader doesn't notice is that the Gospel of John opens with an entire week. Chapter 1. The next day, the next day, the next day, 4 days. And then chapter 2. On the 3rd day, add it up. 7 days, the first week of the new creation. John is rewriting Genesis. He's saying, just as God created the world in 7 days, Christ is starting the new creation in 7 days. And the 7th day, the day of consummation, the day of God's rest, is the day of the wedding in Cana. It's the day the bridegroom arrives. And there's something else, almost impossible to unsee once someone shows it to you. The phrase on the 3rd day reappears with those exact words in the most important moment of the entire Christian faith. Matthew 28, Mark 16, Luke 24, John 20. 4 Gospels, one single phrase repeated. On the 3rd day he rose. Cana opens with on the 3rd day. Calvary closes with on the 3rd day. The first sign is dressed in the same clothing as the last sign. John didn't do that by accident. John is stitching with one single thread the entire ministry of Jesus from his first line to his last. There's a Jewish image that closes this with a force few Christians of the modern West understand. In the rabbinic tradition, the classic Jewish wedding was a 7-day event, 7 days of celebration. And the bridegroom, at the end of the 7th day, would take the bride to his home. Consummation came at the end. Cana is the 7th day of the first week of the gospel, the wedding, the arrival of the bridegroom, and at the end of his ministry, on the cross, another 7th day, the consummation. The bride is purchased, the price is paid. All of that weight is inside 3 words: on the 3rd day. If this is already opening your eyes, hit like on this video and drop the word Cana in the comments. Let's move to the second clue. Now ask yourself something almost nobody asks. Why did Jesus choose a wedding? Out of every possible place to perform his first miracle, a wedding. Small, private, in a town so insignificant that archaeologists today still argue about exactly where it was located. Try to picture the scene. Cana wasn't Jerusalem. It wasn't Caesarea. It wasn't even Capernaum. It was a hamlet in the hills of Galilee, probably a few dozen houses of stone and clay, dirt streets, the smell of olive oil and animal dung from the outskirts. First-century Jewish weddings lasted 7 days. It was the biggest event a town like that would see in years. Every family brought something. Women cooked in the courtyards, musicians beat drums and played flutes. Children ran between the legs of the guests. And the bridegroom, seated in the place of honor, received each visitor with a cup of wine. In the middle of all of that, in a corner, is Jesus, 30 years old, a carpenter from a nearby village, the son of a widow. Almost nobody knows who he is. Almost nobody is going to remember he was there. And here is the answer most people don't hear. Because in the Old Testament, when God wants to describe his relationship with Israel, he almost always uses one image, over and over again. Marriage, Isaiah 54 verse 5. For your Maker is your husband, the Lord of hosts is his name. Hosea 2 verse 19. I will betroth you to me forever. Jeremiah 3 verse 14. Return, faithless children, declares the Lord, for I am your husband. And the prophets didn't stop there. When they began to speak of the Messiah who was coming, they described him also as a bridegroom, and they described the Messianic age, the day when God would finally restore all things, as a wedding with abundant wine, a wedding with overflowing joy. Amos 9, verse 13, the mountains shall drip sweet wine. Joel 3, verse 18, the mountains shall drip sweet wine. Isaiah 25, verse 6. The Lord of hosts will make for all peoples on this mountain a feast of well-aged wine. Feast, wine, wedding, Messiah. These were the words burned into the mind of every devout Jew. When the Messiah finally comes, there will be a wedding, and there will be wine, a lot of wine, better than any wine we've ever tasted. Now pause the video and breathe, because Jesus, in his first public sign, chose a wedding. And he fixed the wine problem. Do you see what John is doing? Jesus didn't perform a useful miracle at a random wedding. Jesus proclaimed himself as the bridegroom. Jesus announced himself as the Messiah. Jesus fulfilled the prophecies of Amos, Joel, and Isaiah in front of guests who were too distracted to understand it. He did it in silence. No banners, no sermon, no shouting, I am the Messiah. He did it through one single action that said all of that at the same time. This is what scholars call the messianic silence of Jesus. It's one of the most fascinating patterns in the Gospels. Jesus almost never declares openly who he is. He lets it be said through gestures, miracles, parables. Only those who know the Old Testament decipher the code. In Cana, the code was a wedding, a wine problem, abundant wine. Translation, the Messiah has arrived, but the guests didn't read the clues. They ate, they drank. They went home. without ever knowing that the bridegroom of the universe had just introduced himself at their party. And here's something that's going to make you uncomfortable, because God is still doing the same thing today, still leaving clues, still revealing himself in silence. And most people are still eating, drinking, laughing, without ever lifting their eyes to see who is standing at the table. Think about something. How many times in your own life has something happened that you called luck, coincidence, chance, and looking back, honestly, it was none of those things? The friendship that showed up at the exact right moment, the door that closed before you walked into a disaster, the verse you read by accident one morning that answered the question you hadn't told anybody, the person who said exactly what you needed to hear, as if they knew what you were thinking. That was the bridegroom, filling vessels in silence, waiting for someone to lift their eyes. And about Mary, pay attention to a detail. Jesus, when he answers her, does not call her mother, he calls her woman. In English it sounds harsh. In the original Greek it's a respectful term, but a formal one. And here John is playing with another layer. Because the first woman mentioned in the Bible is Eve, in Genesis 3, verse 15, where God prophesies that the seed of the woman is going to crush the head of the serpent. The last woman mentioned in the Bible, in a symbolic sense, is in Revelation 12, clothed with the sun, giving birth to the Messiah and fleeing from the dragon. Woman at the beginning, woman at the end, and here in the middle a woman whispering to her son, they have no wine. Mary is in the prophetic chain. She is not a side note, she is a hinge. She is the woman whose seed is the bridegroom. Let's move to the third clue. Mary approaches Jesus with the phrase we already know, 3 words, they have no wine. And Jesus answers her with a phrase that in English sounds cold, almost rude. John 2, verse 4. Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. My hour has not yet come. Stop right there. Because if you've read the entire Gospel of John, you've seen that phrase before. You've seen it many times. John 7, verse 30. They were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. John 8, verse 20. But no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. John 12, verse 23. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. John 13, verse 1. Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father. John 17, verse 1. Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son. Do you see the pattern? In the Gospel of John, the hour is always one single thing. It's the cross, it's the crucifixion, it's the moment where Jesus consummates his mission, where he pours out his blood, where he dies and rises. The hour in John is always, without exception, the hour of the passion and the glory. And Jesus, at his first miracle, is already talking about that hour. Look again at the order of the conversation. Mary says, they have no wine. Jesus answers, my hour has not yet come. Why does he answer that way? Because Jesus knows that the wine she's asking for is not just the wine of the banquet, that the thirst at that wedding is the thirst of all humanity, that the problem of the wine that ran out is the problem of an entire people, of an entire creation that is left without joy, without life, without covenant. And Jesus knows that to fill that real thirst, he is going to have to go to the cross. He is going to have to bleed. That's why when he goes to perform this miracle, he's already thinking about that day. Every gesture he is going to make from today until the last beat of his heart is pointing to one single place, to the cross, to the day he is going to pour himself out entirely for everyone who is thirsty. When you understand this, a cold phrase, my hour has not yet come, transforms into the most tender phrase of the gospel. It's Jesus saying, I'm going to do this miracle for you, Mother. But I want you to know that I'm walking toward a very dark place. I want you to know that day is coming. And look at what Mary does after hearing that answer. She doesn't argue, she doesn't beg, she doesn't push. She turns around, looks at the servants, and says 5 words. Just 5. The last words the Bible records from her mouth in the entire New Testament. Do whatever he tells you. Stop on that. Mary just heard her son say, in essence, the moment hasn't come yet. And her response is not to push. Her response is to surrender. She tells the servants, do whatever he says. Trust without knowing what's going to happen. Let go of control. And because she let go, the miracle happened. There's something deep here. Mary is not the one who produces the miracle, but her faith is what opens the space for it to occur. She doesn't force Jesus' hand. She simply points at him and says, do whatever he says. And that is exactly the role she is going to play in the entire story. Point to Jesus. Step out of the way. Let him shine. How many times do you, facing a problem, try to force the answer? How many times do you tell God, do this, now the way I want? Mary teaches us something else. Bring the problem, speak, and then let go. Trust. Tell the servants of your own life, do whatever he says, and walk away. Because the miracle doesn't arrive when you control it. It arrives when you let it go. If this is moving something inside of you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because the 4th clue is where things get really deep. Now we arrive at the detail almost nobody notices, and it's probably the most important one in the entire passage. John 2, verse 6. Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Read it again, slowly, because every word of that verse is a theological bomb. 6 jars of stone for purification, holding 20 or 30 gallons each. Why does John bother giving you so many details? Because every detail means something. Let's start with the material, stone. Why stone? Because in Jewish law, clay vessels could become impure. If a ritually impure person touched a clay vessel, the vessel was contaminated. But stone vessels couldn't. Stone was considered permanently pure. That's why observant Jewish homes had stone vessels for purification rituals, and there's an archaeological detail that backs this up. In excavations carried out in Jerusalem and Galilee over the last few decades, archaeologists have found dozens of stone vessels dated exactly to the 1st century. In the year 2017, at a site called Einot Amitai, just a few kilometers from modern Cana, a cave workshop was discovered where these vessels were manufactured. They were so common in observant Jewish households that their presence is one of the main markers used to identify a house as Jewish and not pagan in that era. They were expensive, they were heavy, but families had them because ritual purity was at the center of their daily life. And here is the connection almost nobody makes. What were the 10 Commandments written on? Stone. What was the law of Moses written on? Stone. What is the symbol in the entire Hebrew Bible of the Old Covenant, of the law, of the Mosaic system of purification? Stone. The vessels of Cana are not just any vessels, they are vessels of the law. They are containers of the Old Covenant. They are the receptacles of the Jewish system of doing things. Now count how many there are. 6. Why 6? Because in biblical symbolism, the number 7 represents perfection, completeness, the divine. God creates in 6 days and rests on the 7th. Perfection arrives on the 7th. 7 is the number of God, and 6 is what is missing to reach 7. It's incompleteness. It's the human being, created on the 6th day, waiting to enter the rest of the 7th. It's imperfection. It's the human system that never finishes closing the circle. 6 stone vessels means the old covenant made of stone is not enough. 1 is missing. The 7th is missing. The one that completes the system is missing. And then Jesus gives the order. Fill them with water. The vessels which were used for water of purification water for washing hands, washing feet, purifying yourself before eating. Now get filled with water. But when the servants draw the liquid out, it isn't water anymore. It's wine. The best wine. Do you see what just happened? Jesus didn't choose the empty wine jugs, which would have been the logical choice. He chose the vessels of purification. He chose the containers that represented the old system, and he filled them with the new reality. This is not a banquet miracle. This is a gigantic theological declaration. He is saying, the water that cleanses on the outside is not enough anymore. Now comes the wine that cleanses on the inside. The external law fulfills its function, but now I am bringing the internal reality. The old covenant was water for the hands. The new covenant is wine for the heart. Hebrews 10 verse 1 says it explicitly. The law has but a shadow of the good things to come, instead of the true form of these realities, and can never make perfect those who draw near. The law was a shadow. Cana is the image. And here comes the detail that finally seals everything. Look at the amount of liquid Jesus produces. Each vessel, John says, held 20 or 30 gallons, multiplied by 6. We are talking about somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons. At a small village wedding. That's not for that wedding. That's for every wedding. That's messianic wine. That's the prophetic abundance of the new era. That's the promise of Joel fulfilling itself in miniature. The mountains dripping sweet wine. Jesus wasn't solving a social problem. Jesus was showing in one small scene what he was going to do on a cosmic scale. And here is a question every person watching this video should ask themselves honestly. How many stone vessels are there in your life right now? How many old systems are you still carrying that never delivered what they promised? Maybe you're trying to purify yourself on the outside while inside you are dying of thirst. Maybe you're keeping all the forms, all the rituals, all the appearances, and the party of your own life is winding down because the water of external washing never filled you on the inside. Stone vessels are the image of any religious, moral, or personal system that tries to fix you on the outside without touching you on the inside. And we all carry some. The difference between a transformed life and a merely decent life is this. Whether you let Jesus fill your vessels, or whether you keep filling them yourself with water that never becomes anything. And if this just blew your mind the way it blew mine when I discovered it, hit like right now, because the fifth clue is where Cana and the cross become the same scene, viewed from two different angles. In the culture of the first century, wine had a meaning that we, in the 21st century, have forgotten. Wine was not just any drink. Wine was the drink of the covenant. When two parties made a solemn alliance, they sealed the agreement with wine. When a marriage covenant was signed, they toasted with wine. When a new era was inaugurated, wine was poured. Wine was the fluid of commitment, and in the Hebrew Bible, wine has an even deeper association: wine and blood. Genesis 49, verse 11. Speaking of Judah, the prophecy says, "He has washed his garments in wine and his vesture in the blood of grapes." Blood of grapes, that was the Hebrew poetic way of saying wine, but the image stayed burned in. Wine is like blood. When the prophets described the day of God's judgment, they described it as a winepress being trampled. The grape is crushed, the juice bursts out. Wine and blood become the same thing in the prophetic imagination. Isaiah 63, verses 1 to 3. Who is this who comes from Edom, from Bozrah in crimsoned garments? I trod the winepress alone, their lifeblood spattered on my garments, wine and blood, blood and wine. Now go back to Cana. Jesus transforms water into wine, and then fast forward 3 years. On the last night in a closed-off room, Jesus lifts a cup. Luke 22, verse 20. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you, wine that is blood. Do you see the ark? Cana, water transformed into wine. Last Supper, wine transformed into blood. Cross, blood poured out. 3 scenes, one single direction. The first sign points to the last. The first miracle points to the final miracle, which actually doesn't even look like a miracle because it looks like defeat. A body nailed to a wooden beam, blood falling drop by drop. But it wasn't defeat. It was the consummation of what started in Cana. Picture the scene of the cross for 1 second. The sun is high, the sky is darkening. There are 3 men nailed to 3 crosses. The crowd below is shouting, weeping, blaspheming. And at the foot of one of those crosses, there is a woman. The same woman who 3 years earlier at a wedding whispered to her son, "They have no wine." She's standing there watching him die. And the son, in agony, looks down and says 2 words. John 19, verse 28, I thirst, I thirst. Do you see the mirror? In Cana, Mary said, "They have no wine." At Calvary, the son says, "I thirst." The movement reverses. The one who asked for others now sees that the one who gave for others is left with nothing. The thirst he satisfied at that wedding, he now suffers in his own body. He is pouring himself out completely. And here is the detail few preachers mention, but that closes the circle in a devastating way. Count the vessels of Cana again. 6 stone vessels, empty of wine, filled with water, transformed into wine of the new covenant. Do you know what is the next vessel John mentions in his gospel? Let's jump to chapter 19, verse 29. Jesus is on the cross. He is dying. He is thirsty. And then John says, a jar full of sour wine stood there. A jar full of sour wine. Sour wine in the 1st century was wine that had turned acidic, wine fermented past its peak, spoiled wine, corrupted wine, 6 vessels at Cana and 1 more vessel at the cross. Add them up. 7. The 7th vessel, the one that was missing, the one that completes the number of perfection. And it's at the cross, and it's filled with spoiled wine. And they lift it to the lips of Jesus on a stalk of hyssop. Look at this, the same plant that was used in Exodus to smear the blood of the Passover lamb on the doorposts so that death would pass over. Hyssop, blood, lamb. Cana opened with good wine in 6 vessels. The cross closes with bad wine in a 7th vessel. And Jesus, after taking that sour wine, says 2 words. It is finished. Tetelestai, in Greek. It is fulfilled. It is complete. It is consummated. What is finished? What started at Cana. The first sign and the last are the same scene, mirrored. At Cana, the bridegroom arrives and brings abundant wine. At the cross, the bridegroom gives himself and pours out the true wine. At Cana, the guests laugh without understanding. At the cross, the disciples weep without understanding. At Cana, Mary says, "They have no wine." At the cross, Jesus says, "I thirst." At Cana, Jesus says, "My hour has not yet come." At the cross, he says, "It is finished." Cana and Calvary are the same story. One in joy, the other in agony, but both are the wedding of the Lamb. If this hits something inside of you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, because there's still one clue left, the decisive one, the one nobody understood at that wedding, and the one John, with one final line, reveals to us 2,000 years later. The miracle ends. The master of the feast tastes the wine. He finds it extraordinary. He calls the bridegroom and says in John 2, verse 10, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." And here John closes the episode with a line almost nobody comments on. Verse 11, "This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him." Stop on what that sentence does not say. It does not say, and all the guests believed. It does not say, and the entire wedding saw the glory of God. It does not say, and the master of the feast knelt down. It does not say, and the servants fell to their knees. It says only, and his disciples believed in him. How many disciples were there at that moment? 5. They had been called only in the previous chapter. Andrew, Peter, Philip, Nathanael, and another disciple of John the Baptist, whose name is not mentioned. A tiny group. That is all who saw it. The master of the feast tasted the wine and thought it was a good wine. He praised the bridegroom for keeping it back. He had no idea he was drinking the wine of the Messiah. The servants carried the water and drew it out as wine. They knew something had happened, but the text doesn't say they understood. The bridegroom received the compliment from the master of the feast. He probably smiled, nodded, said nothing. People think he's a good host. It's a miracle, and he gets the credit. The guests kept eating, drinking, dancing. The wedding continued, the music kept playing. Nobody paused with their cup to ask, where did this come from? Only 5 men, standing off to the side of the room, saw the glory. Why? Because they knew what to look for. And here, brother, sister, is the deepest and most uncomfortable lesson of Cana. The glory of God was being poured out, literally, into 6 stone vessels, 120 gallons of messianic glory. And the people closest to the miracle never noticed, not because the miracle was invisible, but because they were focused on the wine and not on who gave it. They had the cup in hand and their faces toward the floor. And meanwhile, the Messiah of Israel, the fulfillment of 1,000 years of prophecy, was standing 3 meters away in silence, looking at his mother. And only 5 men saw him. This is Cana. This is the first miracle. It is not a story about supernatural power. It's a story about a brutal question every generation has to answer. Are you drinking the wine, or are you looking at the bridegroom? Because there are crowds who walk into churches every Sunday, sing songs, lift their hands, feel emotions, walk out, eat lunch, return to their lives, and never, not once, lift their eyes to ask where the wine they are drinking comes from. There are people who got converted 20 years ago and are still, spiritually, in the same position as the master of the feast at Cana, tasting, judging, commenting without recognizing the host. And there are others who don't even walk in, who stay outside the banquet looking through the window, thinking that Christianity is just one more religion, without knowing that the bridegroom is inside, waiting for them, serving wine in silence, without shouting, without forcing, waiting for someone with eyes to see. There is a scene that happens in thousands of churches every Sunday and nobody notices. A person walks in, sits in the back row, carries a broken soul, has a whole week of wounds piled up, a work decision they don't know how to make, a relationship that is cracking, a medical diagnosis they have to receive on Monday, a child who won't speak to them, a secret they carry without telling anybody, and they walk in, they sit down, the music starts, the people sing, the preacher speaks, and this person, in the back row, stares forward with their eyes on the floor. They ate at the banquet, they were in the room, but they walked out as empty as they walked in, because they never lifted their eyes. They never dared to believe that the bridegroom was right there, looking toward the back row, waiting for someone to recognize him. And the question of Cana is the question of your life right now. How many miracles have passed by your side while you were eating and drinking? How many times has God filled vessels in your life and you attributed it to luck, to chance, to your own effort, to the good wine the universe saved for you? How many times has Mary at your side whispered, "They have no wine," over your own emptiness, and you didn't hear her? Cana wasn't a story. Cana is a mirror. The empty vessels are you. The inability to keep producing joy on your own strength is you. The end of the party with nothing you can do about it is you. And the only way for the water to become wine is to stop staring at the contents of the vessels and start looking at the one who walks among them. there is one final detail, and with this, I close. Do you know how many weddings are mentioned in the Gospel of John? One, this one, Cana. And in the last book of the New Testament, in Revelation, there's also one, the final one. Revelation 19 verse 7, the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. Cana opens the public ministry of Jesus with a wedding where almost nobody realizes who the bridegroom is. Revelation closes the entire history of humanity with a wedding where the whole universe finally recognizes him. Between those two weddings is you, in the middle, with the cup in hand, and with one question hanging over you. Are you drinking it distracted, like the guests? Or are you drinking it looking at the bridegroom, like the disciples? Because in the end, the difference between the one who walks into the final wedding and the one who stays outside is not theological. It is not moral. It is not liturgical. It is a matter of gaze. It's knowing who you are looking at when you lift the cup. Mary said it to the servants. She said it to you. She said it to everyone who arrives 2,000 years late to a wedding in Cana of Galilee, standing in front of stone vessels that look empty and a silent man who looks like just another guest. 5 words. The last words the Bible records from Mary's mouth in the entire New Testament. Look at what she says. John 2 verse 5. Do whatever he tells you.